It is still reveal season for Legends of Runeterra, so naturally reveals were lurking right around the corner. Yes, pun very much intended, because today's reveals all support the Lurk archetype. We got 5 new Bilgewater cards, and I am excited for the reveals because all of them have the chance to be playable. Now, I'm not saying that all of them are good. I'm not saying that all of these will be staples, but I can see the purpose and the utility in each of these cards, and I think that all of them will at least warrant some level of consideration when you are deck building. I'm going to talk about what to consider for each card. We're going to go through them, evaluate them like we normally do, and we're going to start with Redfin Hammersnout. This is a 2-cost 1/2 Bilgewater follower, has that lurker tag, has the lurk keyword, and it says on play, grant an enemy vulnerable. Now, I love this card. I think that in your Bilgewater Shurima lurk deck, this will be a mainstay. One, you want a lot of 1 and 2 drops with lurk because you want to start scaling right away. You also want a critical mass of cards with the lurk keyword because you need them in your deck, and this fits that bill. But also, this card provides a lot of utility. Again, if you're pairing this with Shurima, if your 1-drop is the fearsome 1-drop, for example, granting an enemy vulnerable is potentially taking away a blocker and allowing that fearsome unit to get through, because you can target the blockers that have 3 attack or more. So I really like this card. I also just like it in general with Shurima because we know Rek'Sai and the 6-drop, they're also working with Overwhelm. That can be very relevant with Vulnerable. The fact that this is Grant for Vulnerable is awesome as well, because if you're attacking on odds and you're playing this on round 2, for example, then you can still get some sort of utility value and set you up for future rounds, because it is going to permanently give vulnerable to whatever target you are hitting with this. So just overall, I just really like this card, especially in the archetype. Speaking of the archetype, I right now strongly expect this archetype to be very much like Deep, which makes me a little bit sad for Bilgewater, I'm not gonna lie, but I expect this to be like Deep, where with Deep you're playing Shadow Isles and Bilgewater together. Let's be honest, that's where all the Deep cards are. It's really hard to support the archetype outside of those regions because you need such a critical mass of cards with Lurk and Lurker. I don't suspect you're going to see a true Lurk deck outside of this region combination. I think it will just be Shurima and Bilgewater. That being said, if we get enough utility out of some of these, so Hammersnout's a great example where it could just be good even outside of a Lurk archetype. If you run like a mini package of Lurk, maybe we see some other combos pop up. But just for now, as we're going through the evaluations and I'm talking about when these cards are going to matter, this is all under the assumption that we are playing Bilgewater and Shurima together, likely with Rek'Sai and the other Xerxai cards. So Hammersnout, I really like this card. It just does a lot of things you want it to do, and it combos well with another card that we're going to cover in the reveals in a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about Bloodbait. This is a 1-cost burst spell. It has the Lurk keyword, which is very important, and it also says create a Snapjaw Swarm on top of your deck. Now, if you do not remember, that was one of the cards revealed on the very first day. That is the 2-cost 0/2 Lurker that when you play it starts a free attack. So Bloodbait here is very important. First, it has the Lurk keyword. Again, we need a critical mass of these. The Lurk keyword is very interesting because it kind of changes the way you think as a player. Normally, we are so used to keywords mattering either when the card is being played or when it's on the board. And Lurk, the keyword, only matters when it's on top of your deck. So if it's a little jarring to see spells and landmarks and things like that with the keyword, I get it, but you have to remember that this only matters when it's on the top of your deck. Now, the Lurker tag, that tribal tag, like dragons, like celestials, in this case it's a Lurker, that matters when it's on the board because those are the things that you are buffing. But the Lurk keyword itself, like on Bloodbait, you want it on as many things as possible because you want it to be on top of your deck. Now, specifically, Bloodbait is cheeky because it has Lurk itself, but also once you've drawn it, if you are worried about triggering Lurk and you want to guarantee that you can trigger Lurk, then playing this for 1 mana as a burst spell can ensure that you're triggering Lurk. It gives you that level of consistency because you're going to put the Snapjaw Swarm on the top of your deck. We know that that's a lurker. It triggers Lurk for your units when you attack. So I like this as a setup. Now, as good as that is, this is not necessarily like an auto include run 3 of, because it can also gum you up. Yes, you're guaranteeing a Lurk trigger, but it also means you're just going to draw a Snapjaw Swarm, and you don't always want to draw that card every round. So there is a bit of a drawback. It's a great card. You love the free attack. This is the sort of thing that I really enjoy if you are playing this on your attack rounds, like you have the attack token naturally. You play Bloodbait and you then go into your attack. It's a burst spell, so you can play it. You still keep priority. You start your attack. You get your trigger for the Lurk. And then because you know you're drawing Snapjaw and it's going to be the next round when it's your off round, you can play that Snapjaw. It starts its free attack, and if there's another card with Lurk on the top of your deck, you get that trigger. So it allows you to set up those consistent kind of openings, but in the later parts of the game, I think that it could be a drawback where you need to draw a specific card. So when you get to the point where maybe you really need to find your Rek'Sai, or we don't know what Pyke does yet, but if Pyke is some sort of finisher, a closer of sorts, and you need to draw Pyke, ensuring that you hit Lurk versus taking the chance on Lurk may or may not matter as much. So this card starts to lose value there. It's also worth noting that this card, in my opinion, starts to lose value if you're running so many cards that you are just confident you're going to hit Lurk. I suspect that we won't see many decks that have every card have the Lurk keyword, right? I don't think we'll see 100% consistency. But if you're somebody who plays a lot of Mist Wraiths, for example, and you're used to, you know, allegiance triggers where your entire deck is Shadow Isles minus, you know, 2 to 4 cards, for example, I think we could see something like that with Lurk, where for the most part, our deck will be primarily Lurk keywords with a couple of utility inclusions. And so Bloodbait, I think, also loses value the more lurkers you have in the deck, because you don't need it. This is really for when you're iffy on your consistency, right? So I think Bloodbait has its place, and I like creating the Snapjaw, and I like that it gives you the opportunity to kind of in that mid game be very consistent with your triggers. But Snapjaw Swarm isn't necessarily amazing by itself either. It's a great and consistent trigger for trying to get you to trigger Lurk on your off turns, but it's just an X2, depending on how many times you've triggered Lurk, free attack, and that's it. So without other triggers, it starts to lose value. Now, if you're also using it to trigger things like Azir, or you've got other weird things, I mean, this is a Bilgewater and Shurima archetype, so maybe you want to run like Sandswept Tomb or something. I'm not your dad. Have fun with it. In those cases, sure, swarm away, but I think that Bloodbait is great for consistency, but also kind of a low power play compared to what the rest of the deck wants to do. So just kind of keep that in mind. Could still see play though. Next up, we have the list, and this is probably my favorite of today's reveals. This is a 0-cost slow spell, and it says grant an enemy vulnerable. If it's already vulnerable, the strongest ally starts a free attack challenging it. This does not have Lurk, so as we start talking about those tools and those utility inclusions that we may or may not want to include that don't have Lurk but have high support for the archetype, this is one of them. In the past, you know, I had talked about Renekton's spell, for example. I think that's really solid because of the buff, the +2/+0, and it's giving something vulnerable. I think it works very well with Rek'Sai. This is another card that I think fits that bill. Obviously, it combos with Hammer Snout, because if Hammer Snout has already granted vulnerable to something, then the list triggers a free attack for you. And free attacks are great. I mean, we were just talking about how Snapjaw Swarm is good at giving you that level of consistency, but if you could do it with something not a swarm, right? Because this is your strongest ally, If, for example, it's the late game and you've played your big Overwhelm 6-drop, or you've leveled up your Rek'Sai, for example, and it's already got Overwhelm and whatever, suddenly that's a whole lot more impressive because it's getting a free attack and it's challenging whatever unit you've put this on, and then also you're getting that extra Overwhelm damage. Now, the real reason I'm a big fan of this card is that it's not limited to the Lurk archetype. This is a card that makes me want to start exploring other archetypes with it. I immediately think of Misfortune lists. So in the past, I had kind of done something cheeky with like Renekton and Misfortune, and I was trying to also take advantage of Azir and Misfortune. There's some lists there where you can be cheeky and take advantage of some of these free attacks. I've also done in the past like Misfortune and Demacia to use cards like Cataclysm, but because it's a free attack, it's going to trigger Misfortune, and because it's a free attack and it's challenging units, it will trigger Renekton, for example. There's a lot of ways I think that you can abuse this. There's plenty of ways in Bilgewater to give or grant units vulnerable as well. And then there are also obviously ways in Shurima to do it. So I think that this card has a lot of deck building opportunities that I cannot wait to explore. Renekton and Misfortune are the two that I immediately want to abuse, but this has some spice. That being said, I think it's very good for this archetype as well. Even if it's not going to end up being a 3 of, having it in as like a 1 of for a bit of a silver bullet or a surprise got you, because the reality is this is a 0 cost card, so you can fully develop your board, your opponent can fully develop, and then when you're both out of mana, it's going to be very hard for them to respond effectively. So for 0 cost to potentially give yourself a free attack and all of the benefits that come with it, I think that this card has a lot of potential and it's worth testing for sure. Big fan of this card. Next up, we have Ripper's Bay. This is a 1 cost landmark from Bilgewater. It is a landmark that does have that Lurk keyword, and it says when allies attack, discard the top card of your deck if it doesn't have Lurk. Now, I reached out to some rioters because I thought it worked this way, but I wanted confirmation. And the order of operations for this is intended to be that Ripper's Bay does its checks first and then Lurk triggers. What I mean by that is that you declare attacks. Normally with Lurk, the moment you lock in your attacks, it checks to see if the top card of your deck is a Lurk, and if so, buffs go out. With Ripper's Bay on the board, you declare your attacks. Ripper's Bay kind of peaks at the top card of your deck, right? And when it peaks, it says, okay, is there Lurk? Great, it stays. And then Lurk triggers, buffs your board. If Ripper's Bay peaks and for whatever reason it's not a Lurk card, maybe it's the list, right? It will discard that card from the top of your deck and then check for Lurk on whatever the next card is. Now, I don't know for sure if it'll check multiple times if you have multiple Ripper's Bays. I assume that's how it works, but nonetheless, even just having this as maybe a 1 of in your Lurk list to, again, help you with that consistency where every time you attack, it does the peak, I think that's great. Now, the downside is whatever non-Lurk cards you're running, they do have the potential of being discarded. So you kind of lose out those opportunities for, you know, drawing those surprise gotcha utility spells, stuff like the list, etc. But this is, I think, again, one of those cards that's like just good enough to warrant considering including. I don't know if it's going to make the final cut because it doesn't do anything on its own. And I think that ultimately this is a list that wants to play things on curve and it wants to like be consistent in its attempts to trigger. And while this helps with that level of consistency, doesn't do anything else for your board. So I'm on the fence. I think that this will at least take some consideration. I don't think that it'll end up being a 3 of. I do think it'll be really good in expeditions for supporting the Lurk archetype where you may not be able to enjoy the benefits of deck building in the same way. But This is Ripper's Bay. It, again, is supposed to work that way. The Rioter who responded to me said that they are still working out some things with the order of operations, ironing it out. So they plan to address it in an upcoming patch if they don't get it by the release patch. So as a heads up, if you play a Ripper's Bay and something is wonky, just know that the intended way that it's supposed to work is it does the check first and that they are working on it. You know, as I was talking about Ripper's Bay, I just realized that another thing the list works incredibly well with is Merciless Hunter, which is already a busted card anyway. So I'm just a big fan of the list. Sorry, it's draining my free thoughts. All right, last up we have Sharkling. Now this card isn't very exciting, but it's very necessary and I'm a fan. So this is just a 1-cost 1/2 lurker with the lurk keyword. If it triggers on your first turn when you play it, you basically get your 2/2 lurker. 2/2s have historically been good enough to be included in theme-based decks. I'm thinking about like Cytheria in Elites, for example. So I think this will end up seeing play because, again, you want early drops. You specifically do want 1-drops as well. You want to be attacking that first round. Whether your 1-drop has lurker or not, you still want 1-drops because you want to be able to play them and attack because, again, the attacker doesn't need to have the lurk keyword. You can play a Dune Keeper round 1, and as long as the top card of your deck has lurk, your lurkers get buffed, and that's what you want. So you want a decent number of 1-drops in your lurk deck, even if they don't have lurk, so that your lurkers continue to get triggered. And if you're attacking on odds and you go first, you don't want to miss an opportunity to potentially trigger lurk. So when you go to deck build, keep that in mind. The attackers don't have to have lurk, just the card on the top of your deck, and then it buffs your lurkers. So 1-drops are actually going to be very important when you build. Now it's nice that this one fits both sides of the coin, right? You've got lurker, so it's getting the benefit and it's a 1-drop, but just, again, kind of keep that in mind when you're deck building, when this archetype comes out and you're considering the cards that don't have lurk that you may want to run and you're unsure. 1-drops are a pretty safe inclusion right now because you want to take advantage of making sure you're able to attack. I suspect Dune Keeper will end up making the cut in the Bilgewater Shurima versions, not only because it's just a really good, potentially busted 1-drop, but because you have 2 attackers. So even if you play your 1-drop and they, you know, if they've got like a thermal beam or whatever, they can't stop both and you still get to declare that attack. So Dune Keeper is just all around, I think, likely going to still end up in your lurk decks. But that's it for the reveals. I liked all 5. I think all 5 have the potential to see play. Like I said, I think Bloodbait and Ripper's Bay are going to be situational. Both of them, in my opinion, will depend on your deck building. Ripper's Bay loses a lot of value if you've got a ton of lurk in your deck, the same way, in my opinion, that Bloodbait loses some of that value. But if you want to include more utility, they're great ways to even things out. I love the list as well. So yeah, love the reveals today. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Let me know what you think of the reveals. Let me know how excited you are for Pyke. And before I do the official sign off, let me just remind you that this is all just the lurk stuff. We still have Echo at the end of this. So I think Echo is going to be a bit of a bomb as well. I'm looking forward to it. But that's it. So until next time, may you walk on warm sands.